After divorcing me and calling me dead weight, my ex-husband invited me to his wedding so everyone could see how far he'd moved up in life. He expected me to arrive embarrassed and alone, but instead I landed at his wedding in a helicopter with my husband and triplets. And that's when everyone discovered a secret that changed the entire ceremony. If you miss this story, you'll miss one of the most satisfying comeback moments you'll ever hear. Because what my ex didn't realize was that he had spent years working for me without even knowing it. On the morning my ex-husband expected to humiliate me in front of 300 of his closest strangers, I was standing in my closet trying to decide which version of myself I wanted him to see. That sentence alone should tell you something, because most people when they wake up on a day like that are deciding what to wear. My name is Simone Hayes, and here's my story. While I was deciding who to be behind me, in the room down the hall I could hear two of my children laughing at something their brother had done, and a small voice saying, "Mama, Caleb ate the crayon again," which, for the record, he had not. Caleb just liked watching his sisters panic. Even at 3 years old, that boy understood leverage. I want you to picture the invitation first because that's where this really starts. Cream-colored cardstock, gold foil lettering, the kind of paper that costs more per sheet than some people's grocery budget for a week. And trust me, I know exactly what that number used to feel like because there was a stretch of my life where I lived it. Darnell Boyd and Bianca Reeves request the honor of your presence. My name was handwritten on the envelope, not typed, handwritten in calligraphy by someone who had clearly been paid to make cruelty look elegant. There was a note tucked inside, separate from the formal invitation. Just a few lines in Darnell's handwriting, the same handwriting that used to sign birthday cards to me a decade ago. Simone wanted you to see how far I've come. No hard feelings. Come, celebrate with us, D. No hard feelings. I sat with that note for a long time the day it arrived. Long enough that the coffee on my desk went cold and a notification from my own company's board chat blinked twice on my phone before I even looked at it. I want to be honest with you about something because this isn't going to be one of those stories where the woman is instantly unbothered and glowing and above it all. I was bothered. My hands were not steady when I first read it. There is a particular kind of sting that only an ex-husband can deliver because he is the one person on earth who watched you at your absolute lowest and decided deliberately to remind you of it in writing. See, Darnell didn't invite me because he wanted me there. Darnell invited me because he wanted an audience for a performance and he needed the one person in the room who would understand exactly what the performance meant. Everyone else at that wedding would see a successful man marrying into a wealthy family. Only I would understand what he was actually saying, with every detail of that day, the venue, the car, the menu, the dress code. Only I would know that every choice was a message addressed specifically to me. Look what you lost. Look what you'll never have. Look how replaceable you were. He had planned, I would later learn, for someone to casually ask me what I did for work, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. He had planned for the seating chart to put me near the kitchen doors, the same kind of placement reserved for distant cousins and plus ones nobody really wanted there. He had even, and I only found this out afterward, from someone who couldn't stop talking about it. Once the truth came out, told two of his groomsmen to keep an eye on the broke ox, in case I tried to make a scene. That phrase, the broke ex. There was a version of me, a long time ago, for whom that phrase would have been accurate. I'm not going to sit here and pretend otherwise because the truth is the whole engine of this story. There was a version of me who counted quarters for laundry, a version of me who learned to make a $14 grocery budget stretch across 5 days. A version of me who sat in a parked car outside a payday loan office for 40 minutes, working up the nerve to walk in before finally driving away because something in me refused to do it. Darnell knew that version of me intimately because he was there for most of it, and because this part matters, he was part of why it happened. But here's what he didn't know. What none of those 300 guests filing into that ballroom on the grounds of the Crestmark Grand knew: that version of me had been gone for years, buried, rebuilt, replaced by someone those old quarters wouldn't even recognize. And the woman who was about to walk, or rather fly into that wedding wasn't coming to beg for a seat at anyone's table. She was coming because, in a way Darnell could not possibly have imagined when he licked that envelope shut, she already owned the table. I need you to sit with that for a second, because it's the heart of everything that's about to unfold. Darnell chose the Crestmark Grand Hotel as his wedding venue because it was, in his mind, the ultimate symbol of arrival. Marble floors imported from somewhere with a name he'd practiced pronouncing. A ballroom with 2-story windows overlooking manicured grounds. A hotel so exclusive that booking it for a wedding required connections, not just money. Darnell worked there. He'd climbed his way up over the years to become a regional events director for Crestmark Hospitality Group, and marrying Bianca Reeves, daughter of a real estate developer with deep pockets and deeper ambitions, was supposed to be the final piece. The marriage that would open doors into developments, partnerships, a level of life he'd been chasing since the day he decided I wasn't worth chasing anymore. What Darnell did not know, what almost no one outside a small circle of attorneys and board members knew, was that 2 years earlier, when Crestmark Hospitality Group was hemorrhaging money after a failed expansion and facing a hostile buyout from a competitor who wanted to gut it for parts, a holding company called Hayes Carter Ventures had quietly stepped in, restructured the debt, took a controlling stake, kept the brand alive, kept jobs intact, and asked in return for exactly one thing: privacy. No press releases, no name on the building, just a seat on the board and final say over anything that mattered. I was the controlling interest behind Hayes Carter Ventures. I owned the floor he was about to get married on. I want to slow down here because I know exactly what some of you are thinking, and I thought it too, more than once in the weeks leading up to that day. Don't go. You don't owe him a single second of your time. Walking into that wedding gives him exactly what he wants: an audience. My husband, Elijah, said almost exactly that to me, sitting across from me at our kitchen table the night the invitation arrived, the cream-colored envelope between us like something radioactive. You don't need to prove anything to that man, Elijah said. You haven't needed to prove anything to him in years. He was right. He's almost always right, which is one of the most annoying and most wonderful things about him. But there was something else underneath my decision that wasn't about proving anything to Darnell at all. It was about a promise I'd made to myself in a basement apartment with no working heat. On a night I will tell you about soon, when I was 26 years old and had nothing left but a duffel bag and a kind of rage that hadn't yet learned what to do with itself. I promised myself that one day I would walk back into a room that once made me feel small, and I would walk into it as exactly who I was. Not smaller, not bigger, not performing anything for anyone. Just whole. Just entirely, unapologetically myself, with nothing left to hide and nothing left to prove. Darnell built his entire wedding day as a stage for my humiliation. He had no idea he was building it on land I already owned. And he had absolutely no idea that the woman he'd once called deadweight was going to land on his future father-in-law's lawn in a helicopter, with 3 children he'd never met, on a day he thought belonged entirely to him. But to understand why that moment hit the way it did, why 300 people went silent at once, why Bianca Reeves' father turned the color of old paper, why the hotel's general manager nearly dropped his champagne flute, you have to go back further than that wedding invitation. You have to go back 10 years to a younger version of me sitting across a kitchen table from a younger version of Darnell, listening to him tell me, in a voice so calm it still echoes sometimes in my quietest moments, that I was deadweight. He was finally setting down. That's where this really begins. I met Darnell Boyd when I was 22 years old, working the front desk at a community college in Atlanta, taking night classes. I paid for 1 semester at a time because that's how much I could afford at once. He was 24, sharp-dressed even when he had no real money to back it up, with the kind of smile that made you feel like you'd already won something just by being looked at. I fell for him fast. I won't dress that up or pretend it was complicated. He was funny, he was ambitious, he talked about the future like it was a house he was already building room by room, and he made me feel like I was going to be standing in that house with him. We got married 18 months later in a small church with folding chairs, a cake from a grocery store bakery, and a reception in the church basement with a borrowed sound system. It wasn't fancy. It was at the time one of the happiest days of my life. For the first few years, things were genuinely good between us. We were broke together, which is a very specific kind of intimacy that people who've never lived it don't always understand. We split a single bus pass for a while. We learned to cook the same 5 meals in 17 different combinations. We had inside jokes about ramen and budgeting apps and the particular sound our old refrigerator made right before it gave up entirely. Darnell worked his way into the hospitality industry, starting at the absolute bottom parking cars, then working the front desk of a mid-tier hotel, then slowly, painstakingly climbing into events coordination. I watched him study industry magazines like other men studied sports stats. I believed in him. I want to be clear about that because it matters for what comes later. I was not a passive bystander in our marriage. I was his biggest believer, his loudest supporter, the person staying up late helping him rehearse pitches for promotions he was terrified he wouldn't get. The trouble started slow, the way trouble usually does. It rarely arrives all at once with a clear villain moment. It arrives in small erosions. I lost my job. First a round of layoffs at the insurance company where I'd worked my way up to a junior claims position. 6 months later I was pregnant, and we were both relieved because even with everything tightening around us financially, we wanted that baby badly. I miscarried at 14 weeks. I'm not going to spend a long time on this part because some griefs don't need to be turned into spectacle to be honored, but I will say this. The loss broke something in me that took years to repair. And it broke something in Darnell too. Except what broke in him calcified into something colder, something that started looking for someone to blame. He never said it was my fault, not directly. He was too careful for that. But there were comments, small ones, about how I wasn't taking care of myself, about how other women bounced back faster from things, about how he was carrying a lot while I was stuck. Around the same time, Darnell landed his first real break, an events coordinator role at Crestmark Hospitality Group, working under their original Atlanta property. It was a good job, a real foothold into the industry he'd been chasing for years, and it was also, I can see now with the clarity that only distance provides, the beginning of him meeting an entirely different world than the one we'd built together. Crestmark events meant rubbing shoulders with developers, executives, people whose names appeared on buildings. People like Frank Reeves. I didn't know Frank Reeves' name yet. I wouldn't for years. But Darnell came home talking about him more and more. Frank Reeves was at the gala tonight. Frank Reeves asked about the new ballroom renovation. Frank Reeves' daughter is involved in some kind of boutique consulting thing. He said the name the way some people say the name of a destination they're trying to manifest themselves into. I was working 3 part-time jobs by then, trying to claw our finances back into shape while also dealing with depression. I didn't yet have language for, in an era before therapy was something either of us could afford or fully understood the value of. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment that flooded every time it rained hard enough, and I remember nights where I genuinely could not tell whether the tightness in my chest was anxiety or just exhaustion, wearing a disguise. Darnell started staying later at work. Then later still. Then there were industry dinners I wasn't invited to, which he explained as networking events, spouses not included, standard practice in his line of work. I believed him, because believing him was easier than the alternative, and because I genuinely did not have the emotional bandwidth at that point to investigate something I was terrified to confirm. I found out about Bianca Reeves 9 months before our divorce was finalized, though I wouldn't learn her full name until much later. At the time, she was just a contact from work, who Darnell mentioned with a particular lightness in his voice that I'd learned, over years of marriage, to recognize as dangerous. I confronted him about it on a Tuesday evening in our kitchen, the same kitchen where, weirdly, he would later sit me down for the conversation that ended everything. He didn't deny it outright. He did something worse. He reframed it. He told me he wasn't sure the marriage was serving either of us anymore. He told me he'd given everything to building a life and felt like he was dragging dead weight behind him. I want you to understand something about that phrase before we move forward, because it's going to come up again, and I need you to feel its full weight the way I felt it that night. I had worked 3 jobs while grieving a miscarriage. I had stretched grocery budgets so he could afford a decent suit for client meetings. I had sat up countless nights helping him prepare for interviews and reviews. I had, by every honest measure, carried at least my fair share of that marriage, often more. And he called me deadweight. The divorce happened fast once he decided. Within 4 months, papers were filled. He kept the apartment, since it was technically in his name from before we married. A detail I hadn't thought to question back when we were two broke kids in love who trusted each other completely. I moved out with 2 suitcases, a box of kitchen items, and roughly $800 to my name. The cruelest moment, the one that, if I'm honest, is the true seed of everything that grew afterward, happened about 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. Darnell's company held an annual hospitality gala, a black tie event celebrating achievements across their properties, and somehow through a mutual friend group that hadn't yet fully sorted itself into his side and her side, I ended up there. I shouldn't have gone. I know that now. But I had nothing else that week. No money for a real outing, a friend with an extra ticket, and a stubborn, foolish hope that maybe seeing each other in a neutral setting might soften something between us. Darnell was there with Bianca, not officially announced as a couple yet, but close enough, standing close enough, laughing at things only people who already know each other's rhythms laugh at. He saw me. He walked over, not to say hello, not even out of basic decency, but specifically, I understood this within seconds, to make a point in front of people who mattered to him. "Simone," he said, loud enough for the small cluster around him to hear. "Didn't expect to see you somewhere like this." A pause, calculated, theatrical. "You look good, really, considering everything." "Considering everything." Bianca laughed. Not cruelly. I'll give her that much. She didn't fully understand the cut he was making. Not yet. Not the way someone who'd lived inside that marriage would. But others around them understood completely. And a few of them laughed, too, softly, the kind of laugh designed to be deniable later if challenged. I left that gala and sat in my car in a parking garage for almost an hour before I could trust myself to drive. I remember staring at the steering wheel and making a decision that had nothing to do with revenge, not yet. Not in any concrete way. The decision was simpler and, in retrospect, far more important. I'm never again going to be a woman someone can humiliate in a room and laugh about afterward. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I am rebuilding myself into someone untouchable. I moved in with my grandmother for the next 8 months, sleeping in a room that still had floral wallpaper from the 70s, working a job at a catering company that paid barely above minimum wage, and slowly, painfully putting myself back together piece by piece. I did not know, sitting in that floral wallpapered room with $800 and a broken heart, that the catering job I'd taken purely out of desperation was about to become the single most important decision of my entire life. I did not know that an older woman with sharp eyes and a sharper business mind was about to walk into that kitchen and change everything. But she was, and that's where the rebuilding really starts. Her name was Odessa Freeman, and she ran the catering company that hired me, a tight, efficient operation called Freeman U Daughters Catering. Though by the time I joined, her actual daughters had long since moved into other careers, and daughters had become more of an honorary title for whichever women she happened to be mentoring at the time. I was hired to work the kitchen line, plating appetizers and running trays, the kind of job that's invisible to most people at the events you serve, which suited me fine in those days because invisibility felt safer than being seen. Odessa noticed me within the first week. Not because I did anything spectacular. I burned a tray of bacon-wrapped dates on my 3rd shift and nearly cried about it in the walk-in cooler, but because, as she told me much later, I worked like somebody who had something to prove and nowhere left to fall. She said she recognized that energy because she'd carried it herself, decades earlier, building her catering business out of a single rented kitchen after her own marriage fell apart. Odessa started talking to me during slow stretches of events, asking questions that seemed casual but weren't. What did I study in school? What did I actually want if money wasn't a factor? What scared me most about my own future? I didn't have great answers at first. I'd spent so long organizing my life around someone else's ambitions that I'd forgotten how to locate my own. But something started shifting in me during those months. I started noticing things about the events we catered, not just the food but the logistics, the staffing patterns, the way certain venues bled money through inefficiency while others ran like clockwork because someone had clearly designed the systems with care. I started asking Odessa questions about the business side, and she started answering them in real detail, eventually handing me a small folder of basic accounting work, just to see if you've got a head for it. I did have a head for it, more than I'd ever imagined. Within a year, I'd moved from plating appetizers to helping Odessa manage staff and logistics for larger events. Within 2 years, she'd made me a junior partner, splitting a small percentage of profits with me. An act of generosity I didn't fully understand the weight of until much later, when I understood how rarely Black women in business extend that kind of trust to someone without being absolutely certain it's deserved. It was during this period, working a corporate retreat for a mid-sized construction firm, that I met Elijah Carter. Elijah was nothing like Darnell, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment. Where Darnell had always performed confidence, Elijah simply possessed it, quietly, without needing an audience to confirm it. He ran a small but respected construction and renovation company, the kind of business built on actual craftsmanship and word-of-mouth trust rather than flash. He'd been hired to do minor venue repairs before the retreat. I was helping staff, and we ended up talking in a hallway for 20 minutes about something completely unremarkable. A broken sconce light, if I remember correctly. And somehow that 20 minutes turned into him asking if he could take me to dinner. I was guarded. I want to be honest about that. I had scar tissue from my marriage that hadn't fully healed, and I was deeply suspicious of charm, having learned the hard way that charm and character are not the same thing. But Elijah wasn't charming in that performative way. He was steady. He listened more than he talked. On our third date, when I finally told him a stripped-down version of my divorce, leaving out most of the painful details, because I wasn't ready to hand those to anyone yet, he didn't try to fix it or perform sympathy. He just said, "That man sounds like he confused having you with deserving you." And then he changed the subject, because he understood I didn't want to dwell. We married 2 years later, in a small ceremony that felt like the opposite of performance close family. Real laughter. A cake. Odessa insisted on making herself as a wedding gift. It was, without exaggeration, everything my first marriage should have been and never was. Around this same time, Odessa decided to retire. And rather than selling the business to outside buyers, she sold her remaining stake to me at a price far below market value, with one condition: that I keep her name somewhere in the new branding, so people remember where it started. I renamed the company Hayes Premier Events, with a small line beneath the logo reading, "Founded on the legacy of Freeman and Daughters." That detail mattered enormously to me, and it still does. What followed were 5 years of relentless, unglamorous growth. I want to be clear with you about this because too many stories like mine get flattened into, "and then she got rich," as if success arrives in a single lucky moment instead of 1,000 exhausting ones. I worked 18-hour days during peak wedding and gala seasons. I made costly mistakes, overextending on a corporate contract that nearly bankrupted the company in its second year. A staffing disaster at a major event that cost us a key client relationship. I learned slowly and expensively how business actually works at scale, not the version you read about in motivational posts. Elijah, meanwhile, was building his own company alongside mine, and together, carefully, deliberately, we started reinvesting profits into property. Small commercial spaces first. Then, as Hayes Premier Events built a reputation managing logistics for boutique hotels and event venues across the Southeast, we noticed something: hospitality properties were chronically undervalued by people who didn't understand the operational side, but desperately needed people who did. We formed Hayes Carter Ventures together, a holding company structured deliberately to stay quiet, to avoid the kind of attention that invites scrutiny before you're ready for it. Our first major acquisition was a struggling boutique hotel chain in financial distress, which we restructured and turned profitable within 18 months by fixing the operational chaos that had been bleeding it dry. Word started spreading in certain circles. Quiet circles, the kind where business actually gets done, far from headlines that Hayes Carter Ventures had a particular skill for rescuing hospitality assets other investors had given up on. That reputation is exactly what brought Crestmark Hospitality Group to our door. I remember the day clearly. Our attorney walked into a meeting with a folder marked confidential and said, "Crestmark is drowning. Failed expansion, over-leveraged debt, a hostile buyout circling that wants to break it into pieces and sell the real estate. They need a quiet rescue, fast, and they need someone who actually understands hotel operations, not just spreadsheets." I had not worked directly for Crestmark in years, not since my brief, miserable stint doing event support contract work for them in the early days of rebuilding my life. Invisible work, the kind nobody remembers you for. I had no personal stake in saving them beyond pure business instinct. It was, purely and simply, a good deal. A strong brand with terrible management, exactly the kind of project Hayes Carter Ventures specialized in. We restructured the debt. We took the controlling interest. We kept the leadership team mostly intact because the people running daily operations weren't the problem. The previous ownership's reckless expansion was. We asked for one thing in return for our investment: total privacy. No press releases naming us, no plaques, just a board seat, full transparency into the books, and final authority on anything material. It was roughly 8 months after that deal closed that I learned, through a casual comment from someone on our internal team reviewing regional staff structures, that Darnell Boyd was a regional events director at the Crestmark Grand property in Atlanta. I sat with that information for a long time. I didn't tell Elijah right away, not because I was hiding it, but because I genuinely needed to sit alone with what it meant. The man who once called me deadweight, who laughed at a gala while his future fiancé's friends snickered at the woman he'd discarded, was now, without knowing it, working inside a company I controlled. I made a decision in that quiet moment that I want to be completely honest about, because it says something true about who I'd become. I did not move to expose him. I did not try to get him fired out of some lingering resentment. I genuinely did not think about him much at all in the years that followed, busy as I was building a life, a marriage, and eventually, after 3 difficult years of fertility, struggles, 2 failed IVF rounds, and a grief I will save for another telling, finally welcoming our triplets, Asha, Nia, and Caleb, into the world. Darnell Boyd simply existed, unknowingly, inside the edges of a life I had built far beyond anything he could imagine, and I let him exist there without a second thought. Until the cream-colored envelope arrived. When I opened that invitation and saw the venue listed, the Crestmark Grand Atlanta, something settled in me with a strange, quiet click, like the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was still assembling. Darnell had chosen, out of every venue in the city, the one I controlled, to stage the wedding designed specifically to remind me how far beneath him I supposedly remained. I called our attorney first, not out of malice but simple due diligence, to confirm what I already suspected. The wedding had indeed been booked through Darnell's own internal employee privileges at the property. A generous staff discount on the venue. Part of why Frank Reeves had been so easily convinced his daughter was marrying into genuine industry connections, rather than a mid-level coordinator riding someone else's company largesse. I sat with the invitation, the note, and that information for 3 full days before I told Elijah everything. The gala humiliation years ago, the deadweight comment, all of it, full detail this time, nothing softened or left out. He listened the way he always listens, fully, without rushing me toward a reaction. "What do you want to do?" he finally asked. "I want to go," I said. Not to ruin anything, not even really for him. I want to walk back into a room that once made me feel like nothing. And I want to walk into it as exactly who I actually am now. Whatever happens after that happens. Elijah nodded slowly, and then he smiled. The particular smile he reserves for moments when he's genuinely impressed by me, which is a smile I've come to treasure more than almost anything else about him. "Then we're going as ourselves," he said. "All 5 of us." That decision, simple, almost understated in the moment, is what set everything else into motion. Because going as ourselves for our family meant something Darnell could never have anticipated when he licked that envelope shut and imagined the satisfaction of my humiliation. Meant a helicopter on the lawn. It meant 3 children he'd never laid eyes on. Meant the full, undisguised truth finally landing literally in the middle of his carefully constructed performance. If you've been enjoying this video so far, I have a small favor to ask. I spend quite a bit of time putting these videos together, planning, recording, editing, just to make sure you get something helpful and enjoyable to watch. And the truth is, a lot of folks watching haven't subscribed yet. In fact, about 98% of viewers are just watching quietly. No subscription, no like, just passing through like a polite guest who never signs the guest book. So here's all I'm asking. Take a moment and tap that subscribe button. It's completely free, no charges, no commitments, and it simply lets you know whenever I share a new video. And if you're finding this helpful, go ahead and give it a like as well. It really does help more people find this content. Think of it as a small way of saying, yes, I'd like to see more of this. Alright, I won't keep you. Let's get right back to it. The morning of the wedding, I woke up before my alarm, the way you do when your body already knows the day ahead matters more than sleep does. Elijah was already awake beside me, lying on his back, staring at the ceiling with the particular stillness he gets when he's turning something over carefully in his mind. You don't have to do this, he said, not for the first time. Just so you know, that's still true right up until the second we get in the car. I know, I said, and I did know. That's important. Nobody pushed me into that day. Not Elijah, not Odessa, who I'd called the night before just to hear her steady voice talk me through my nerves, the way she used to talk me through burnt appetizer trays a decade earlier. The decision was entirely mine, made with clear eyes, and that clarity mattered to me more than almost anything else about how the day unfolded. Getting 3 3-year-olds dressed and fed and reasonably calm before 9 in the morning is its own form of combat, regardless of what the rest of your day holds. Asha wanted to wear rain boots with her dress and would not be talked out of it through reasonable negotiation. Only eventual bribery, involving a promised stop for pancakes. Nia cried because Caleb had in fact finally eaten a crayon purple specifically, and was deeply offended on her brother's behalf about the unfairness of crayons existing at all if he weren't allowed to eat them. Caleb, for his part, seemed entirely unbothered by either the crayon or the chaos he'd caused, which tracked with everything I already knew about his personality. In the middle of that ordinary, beautiful, exhausting morning chaos, I found a strange kind of peace settling into me. Whatever was waiting at the Crestmark Grand that afternoon, it could not undo this 3 small, loud living proofs that my life had continued, expanded, deepened, in ways Darnell's cruel little note could never touch. I had debated for weeks how exactly we would arrive. A car felt wrong, somehow too ordinary, too easily explainable, too close to the kind of arrival Darnell might have half expected if he imagined I'd come at all. Dressed carefully to seem successful, the way people sometimes overcompensate when they feel insecure. I did not want to overcompensate. I wanted something that simply, undeniably told the truth. Elijah, ever practical, was the one who suggested the helicopter, half as a joke at first. You own a hotel with a helipad on its private grounds, used for executive transport, he pointed out. Why are we sitting in traffic for an hour to get there? He wasn't wrong. The Crestmark Grand had a small private helipad on its eastern grounds, technically reserved for VIP guests and emergency transport, installed during the property's original construction decades earlier and barely used in recent years outside of the occasional high-profile booking. As majority owner, authorizing its use for our arrival required nothing more than a single phone call to the property's general manager, a quietly competent man named Reginald Pierce who had worked for Crestmark for nearly 20 years and had only met the ownership group face-to-face twice, both times through layers of formal introduction that obscured exactly who controlled the controlling interest behind Hayes Carter Ventures. When I called Reginald that morning to request helipad clearance for a personal matter, a family event happening at the property today, he didn't ask a single unnecessary question. That's part of why I trusted him. He understood instinctively the difference between curiosity and competence. Of course, Mrs. Carter, he said. I'll have the pad cleared and ready. Anything else you need from us? I almost laughed at the question because the honest answer was complicated in ways I didn't have time to explain over the phone. No, I said instead. Just that. Thank you, Reginald. We dressed the children in soft, elegant clothes, nothing flashy, nothing performed, just well-made and comfortable, the kind of quality that doesn't need to announce itself loudly to be recognized by anyone who actually understands what they're looking at. I wore a deep emerald dress Elijah had helped me pick out months earlier for an entirely different event, simple in its lines, the kind of garment that costs what it costs because of the craftsmanship, not the logo. I did not wear anything ostentatious. I did not need to. The flight to the Crestmark Grand took 11 minutes. I remember watching the city shrink and rearrange itself below us through the window, the kind of view that still, even years into this life, makes something in my chest tighten with quiet disbelief at how far the road had actually traveled. Caleb pressed his small hand against the window glass, fascinated by the toy-sized cars below. Asha and Nia argued companionably about whether they could see our house from up there, though we were nowhere near close enough to actually see it. Elijah reached over at one point and took my hand, not saying anything, just holding it the way he does when words would only get in the way of what he actually means. Whatever happens down there, he finally said as the hotel grounds came into view below us, manicured lawns spreading out in careful geometric patterns around a white tent visible even from altitude. You already won this a long time ago. Today's just everybody else finding out. I held on to that sentence the entire descent. From the air I could see the wedding setup taking shape, rows of white chairs arranged on the lawn for what I guessed was the ceremony portion. The larger ballroom presumably reserved for the reception afterward, given the size of the tent structures nearby. Guests were beginning to arrive, small clusters of formally dressed figures moving across the grounds like carefully placed pieces on a board. I want to be honest about something here because I think it matters for understanding everything that came after. I did not plan, in any premeditated way, exactly how the confrontation with Darnell would unfold. I had not scripted lines. I had not rehearsed a speech designed to humiliate him the way he'd planned to humiliate me. My intention, as genuinely as I can convey it, was simply to arrive, fully, unmistakably, as myself, and let whatever happened next happen honestly, without manufactured drama. What I had not fully accounted for was just how loudly the truth speaks for itself when it finally lands. As our pilot began the final approach, lowering smoothly toward the cleared helipad situated a short distance from the ceremony grounds, I watched through the window as the first guests below began to notice the aircraft descending, heads turning upward, hands shielding eyes against the afternoon sun, a ripple of confused attention spreading outward across the lawn like the first ring from a stone dropped into still water. By the time our skids touched down on the helipad, the ripple had become something closer to a wave. I could see, even from inside the cabin, clusters of guests abandoning their seats entirely, drifting toward the edge of the ceremony grounds to get a better look at whoever was arriving in such an unexpected fashion. The rotors began winding down. Elijah unbuckled Caleb's car seat with the practiced efficiency of a father who'd done this exact motion 1,000 times before, while I checked Asha and Nia's small dress shoes one final time, smoothing down hair that the wind through the cabin had already begun to muss. "Ready?" Elijah asked. I looked at my 3 children, oblivious to the magnitude of what was about to unfold around them, simply excited about the novelty of having ridden in a helicopter, which, to them, in that moment, was the single most interesting fact about the entire day. "Ready?" I said. And then the cabin door opened. The first thing I registered, stepping down from the helicopter with Asha's small hand wrapped tightly around mine, was the silence. Not silence in the sense of no sound at all. There was still the dying whir of the rotors slowing overhead, the distant murmur of a string quartet that had clearly been instructed to keep playing regardless of distraction, the rustle of 300 formally dressed guests shifting in their seats to get a better view. But there was a particular quality of silence underneath all of it, the kind that happens when a crowd of people simultaneously realizes that whatever is happening was not supposed to be part of the planned program. Elijah came down behind me. Caleb balanced easily on his hip, and Nia followed close at my other side, gripping my dress with one small fist. Suddenly a little shy at the sheer number of unfamiliar faces turned in our direction. We walked across the lawn toward the ceremony grounds, not rushing, not performing, just walking the way any family walks toward an event they've been invited to attend. I could see as we approached the precise moment Darnell noticed us. He was standing near the front of the ceremony space in a tailored gray suit, mid-conversation with one of his groomsmen, and his face did something I will genuinely remember for the rest of my life. It went through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, and then, unmistakably, fear, the specific fear of a man realizing in real time that something he'd carefully constructed was collapsing faster than he could process. Bianca Reeves, standing nearby in a simple white dress, not yet in her full bridal gown, turned to see what had pulled her fiancé's attention so completely, and her expression shifted into pure, open confusion as she took in the sight of us, the helicopter on the lawn behind us, the children, the woman she'd presumably heard described, in whatever version of the story Darnell had given her, as someone unremarkable, beneath consideration, irrelevant to their future together. A man I didn't immediately recognize, standing close to Bianca with the particular posture of someone used to commanding rooms, stepped forward slightly. I would learn moments later, this was Frank Reeves, Bianca's father, the real estate developer whose business connections Darnell had been so eager to marry into. "I'm sorry," Frank said, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to controlling unexpected situations. "But I don't believe we were expecting Simone Hayes," I said simply, extending my hand toward him, calm in a way that surprised even me in the moment. "Carter now. I believe my ex-husband invited me." Darnell had crossed the lawn by then, his face arranged into something approximating composure, though the tightness around his eyes told a different story. "Simone," he said, with the particular forced lightness of someone trying to salvage a narrative in real time, in front of an audience. "You made it. With a helicopter, apparently. Bold choice." "You did invite me," I said, keeping my voice even, almost gentle. "I figured I should make an entrance worth the invitation." A few uncomfortable laughs rippled through the nearby guests, the kind of laughter that doesn't know yet whether it's appropriate, waiting for someone to clarify the tone of what was happening. It was Reginald Pierce, the hotel's general manager, who clarified it entirely without meaning to, simply by doing his job. Reginald had clearly been alerted to our landing and had hurried over from wherever he'd been overseeing the event, logistics, arriving at the edge of our small gathering, slightly out of breath, his expression shifting immediately into the particular respectful urgency reserved for people he understood to hold real authority. "Mrs. Carter," he said, addressing me directly, "I do apologize for any disruption. We cleared the pad as requested, but I wasn't informed you'd be attending this specific event today. Is everything to your satisfaction? Should I have the events team make any adjustments to accommodate you and your family?" The silence that followed that simple, deferential question was, without exaggeration, the most complete silence I have ever experienced in a crowd of 300 people. Frank Reeves' expression shifted, first confusion giving way, slowly, to something like dawning calculation, the particular look of a businessman realizing he's missing a crucial piece of context. "Mrs. Carter?" he repeated, looking between Reginald and me. "I'm sorry, Carter, as in..." "Hayes Carter Ventures," Reginald said, before I could decide whether to answer myself, with the slightly bewildered tone of someone assuming the connection was already obvious. "Mrs. Carter is our controlling owner," I assumed. He stopped, looking between Darnell's stricken face and my calm one, finally understanding in real time that he had just detonated something he hadn't fully understood the shape of. Darnell's face in that moment did not simply fall. It collapsed in stages, like a structure losing its load-bearing walls one at a time. I watched him try to speak twice before any actual sound emerged. "That's not," he finally managed. "Simone doesn't. She worked in catering. She did event staffing, small stuff years ago. That..." It became considerably less small. I said, still gently, because I genuinely did not feel the need to raise my voice or perform anger. I wasn't fully feeling. The truth, I'd learned, rarely needs volume to land with full force. Hayes Premier Events grew into Hayes Carter Ventures about 6 years ago. We restructured Crestmark Hospitality Group's debt during their financial crisis 2 years back. I believe you've worked for this company in some capacity this entire time, Darnell. Frank Reeves had gone very quiet, and I could see with the particular clarity that comes from years of reading rooms and business negotiations exactly what he was calculating. Not the emotional drama unfolding in front of him, but the cold, practical reality that the business relationship he believed his daughter's marriage was securing. Access to Crestmark properties and connections through Darnell's supposed industry standing had just revealed itself to be built on a foundation that didn't actually belong to Darnell at all. It belonged to me. Bianca, Frank said quietly, not taking his eyes off Darnell. I think we need to step aside and talk. Bianca, to her credit, did not seem entirely surprised by the direction her father's concern had taken. I would learn later, through channels that exist whether you seek them or not in interconnected social circles, that she had her own quiet doubts about Darnell that this moment simply confirmed, rather than created. She looked at Darnell for a long moment, something hardening in her expression that hadn't been there minutes earlier. Is it true? She asked him directly. Did you actually tell my father you had a controlling relationship with Crestmark's ownership? Because that's what he told our families, Darnell. That's part of why this venue mattered so much to him. Darnell opened his mouth, and whatever he intended to say in his own defense never fully emerged because Reginald Pierce, still standing slightly bewildered at the center of a situation he'd unintentionally detonated, chose that exact moment to add one more devastating detail, entirely unaware of its weight. I should mention, Reginald said, glancing between Darnell and me with growing unease. The board did flag some discrepancies in your expense reporting for this quarter, Mr. Boyd. I was planning to discuss it with you after the event, but given the circumstances. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I want to be honest with you about something in this moment because I think it's important for understanding who I actually am, beyond the satisfying drama of the scene itself. I did not orchestrate the expense reporting issue. I didn't know about it until Reginald mentioned it, standing right there on that lawn. I had not, in any calculated way, set a trap designed to destroy Darnell's career alongside his wedding. The simple, almost mundane truth is that running a real company means real oversight. Exists regardless of personal history, and Darnell's own conduct, separate entirely from anything involving me, had already been quietly under review before that day even began. Sometimes the truth doesn't need help to be devastating. It simply needs room to surface. What I did next, I want to describe carefully, because it's the part of this story I'm proudest of, more than the helicopter, more than the reveal itself. I crouched down slightly so I was at eye level with Asha, Nia, and Caleb, who had been watching the entire exchange with the particular patient confusion children bring to adult conversations they don't fully understand. You all did so good, I told them quietly, being patient through all this grown-up talking. Who wants pancakes now like we promised? Asha's face lit up immediately, all the tension of the surrounding adults forgotten entirely. Pancakes, she announced, loudly enough that several nearby guests, despite the gravity of everything else unfolding, couldn't help but laugh, real laughter this time. Warm and human, cutting through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. I stood back up and looked at Darnell one final time. He was standing alone now, Bianca and her father having stepped several feet away, deep in a conversation that was clearly going to determine the rest of his immediate future. Reginald hovering uncertainly nearby. The wedding planner somewhere in the background frantically trying to figure out whether the ceremony was proceeding at all. I hope it works out for you, I told Darnell, and I meant it more genuinely than he probably believed possible in that moment. Truly, I'm not here to destroy your life, Darnell. I came because you invited me, and because I wanted to walk into a room you built to make me feel small, as exactly who I've actually become. That's all this was ever about for me. Simone! he started, and I could hear underneath the panic something that might have been the beginning of an actual apology, 10 years too late. "Take care of yourself," I said simply, and turned back toward my family. We left 20 minutes later, well before whatever remained of the ceremony attempted to resume, and from what I understand, very little of it actually did. The helicopter lifted off the same helipad it had landed on less than an hour earlier, carrying us back up over the manicured grounds, the white tent, the scattered, stunned guests still processing what they'd just witnessed. Caleb fell asleep almost instantly against Elijah's shoulder, exhausted from the excitement. Asha and Nia debated with great seriousness whether the pancakes we'd promised would have chocolate chips, syrup, or their eventual joint decision, absolutely both. I watched the Crestmark Grand shrink below us, the same way the city had shrunk on our way there, and I felt something settle inside me that I hadn't fully expected to feel. Not triumph exactly, though there was some of that mixed in. Mostly, I felt finished, complete, like a door I'd been standing in front of for 10 years had finally, fully closed behind me. The story spread faster than I expected, though I suppose I should have anticipated that 300 wedding guests, several of them with active social media accounts, were never going to keep something like that quiet. Within days, versions of what happened, some accurate, many wildly exaggerated, were circulating through Atlanta's social and business circles. I heard, secondhand, about a version where I'd apparently arrived with an entourage of bodyguards. Another version had me delivering a lengthy, scathing speech that in reality never happened, because the actual confrontation lasted barely a few minutes and required almost none of the dramatic declarations people imagined into it afterward. What was accurate and what mattered most in the weeks that followed was simpler and far less theatrical than the rumors suggested. Darnell lost his position at Crestmark within 2 weeks. The expense reporting discrepancies Reginald had mentioned turned out to be more serious than a passing comment. Suggested a pattern of inflated vendor invoices that, once the board formally investigated, amounted to a clear violation of company policy, regardless of any personal history attached to the situation. I want to be completely transparent here. The board's decision was made entirely on the merits of that investigation, conducted by people who had no knowledge of or interest in the personal drama that had unfolded on the lawn that day. I did not push for his termination. I didn't need to. The truth of his own conduct did that work without any assistance from me. His engagement to Bianca Reeves ended within the same month, though from what I understand through the second-hand channels these things travel through, it had less to do with the wedding day's revelations directly and more to do with what those revelations exposed about the foundation Darnell had built his entire relationship with her family upon. Frank Reeves, I learned, was a man who valued strategic value above almost everything else, and once it became clear that the industry connections Darnell had presented as substantial were, in reality, borrowed credibility from a job he'd just lost, there wasn't much left holding the engagement together. I did not gloat about any of this. I want to be honest with you about that because I think it's the part of this story that matters most. Beyond the satisfying spectacle of the wedding day itself, there is a version of this story where the ending is simply about watching a cruel man lose everything. And there's a certain justice in that, undeniably. But the version of this story I actually care about, the one I hope sticks with you longer than the helicopter or the reveal, is about what happened to me in the 10 years between that kitchen table conversation and that lawn. I think about the woman I was at 26, sitting in my grandmother's house with floral wallpaper and $800 and a heart that felt permanently cracked. If you had told her, in that moment, everything that was coming, the catering job, Odessa's mentorship, Elijah, the triplets, the company, the helicopter, she would not have believed a single word of it. She couldn't have. She was too deep in the wreckage to imagine anything beyond simply surviving the next month. That's what I want you to take from this, if you take anything at all. Not the revenge, not the satisfying collapse of a man who deserved exactly what his own choices brought him. What I want you to take is this: the worst chapter of your life is not obligated to be the final chapter. The room that makes you feel smallest is not the room you're destined to remain in. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with pain isn't to perform forgiveness you don't yet feel or chase revenge that ultimately empties you out sometimes. The most powerful thing is simply to build, quietly, patiently, year after unglamorous year, until the life you've built speaks a truth louder than anything anyone ever said to tear you down. A few months after the wedding, I ran into Bianca Reeves, unexpectedly, at a charity gala. Neither of us had realized the other would be attending. I want to tell you about this moment because it surprised me, and because I think it completes something important about this story. She approached me directly, which took a kind of courage I respected immediately. "I wanted to say something to you," she said, "even though I know it's strange, given everything. I'm not angry at you. I was angry at the situation for a while, but I've had time to think about it, and I understand now that you didn't do anything to me." He did. I appreciated that more than she probably realized. "I'm sorry it cost you something difficult," I told her honestly. "None of that was about you." "I know," she said. "I think, honestly, you probably did me a favor I wasn't ready to recognize at the time." We didn't become friends exactly, but we left that conversation with something like mutual respect, which felt like a far better resolution than the version of this story, where everyone remains permanent enemies forever. As for Darnell, I heard much later that he'd relocated to a different city, taken a smaller position at a hotel with considerably less prestige than Crestmark, and was by most accounts attempting some version of rebuilding his own life. I genuinely hope that's true. I'm not interested in his continued suffering as some kind of ongoing scoreboard. The version of justice I actually believe in isn't about watching someone suffer indefinitely. It's about the simple, complete truth finally being known, and then, having been known, being allowed to settle while the people who deserve to move forward, move forward. These days, my life looks almost nothing like the life I lived during my first marriage. And yet, in the ways that matter most, it's built on exactly the same values I always actually held, even when I was too exhausted and too underestimated to act fully on them. Elijah and I still run Hayes Carter Ventures together, though we've slowly started stepping back from day-to-day operations to spend more time with Asha, Nia, and Caleb, who are growing faster than I'm emotionally prepared for. The way I understand all children eventually do. Odessa still calls me every Sunday, and we still talk about the business the way we always have, except now half our conversations are about the triplets instead of catering logistics. I think about that cream-colored invitation sometimes, still tucked away in a drawer. I haven't fully decided whether to keep or finally throw out. Not because I need the reminder of what Darnell tried to do, but because I think there's something worth remembering in the contrast between his intention and the actual outcome. The way cruelty, when met with patience and genuine growth rather than matching cruelty, tends to expose itself far more completely than any direct confrontation ever could. If you've made it this far with me, through all of it, the fall, the floral wallpaper, the burnt appetizer trays, the helicopter, the lawn full of stunned faces, I hope you're carrying something useful out of this beyond just the satisfaction of watching a cruel man's plan collapse on him in real time. I hope, if you're in your own version of that basement apartment right now, cold and broke and convinced the worst chapter of your story is the only chapter left, you'll let this be proof that it almost never is. Build quietly, build patiently. Let the people who underestimated you keep underestimating you for exactly as long as it takes, because the moment the truth of who you've become finally lands, and it will land, eventually, in its own time, in its own way, it tends to speak louder than anything they ever said to tear you down in the first place. That's the whole story. Thank you for sitting with me through it.